Okay. Dead Man's Song, Jonathan Maberry. Second novel in the Pine Deep trilogy from 2007. This book's about 470 pages and it takes a minute to read. But if you treasure horror that's more story and character driven than just pulp sensations, then this is the best recommendation I could possibly give. Might be the second or third best horror novel I've ever read in my life. It's got so much that it's really difficult for me to talk about. If I was to do a spoiler review, which this is not, I could analyze, and pick apart this. It's much deeper than I expected, with so many meta symbols and but it's really about the fun, and it's really got plenty of commercial appeal for just about anybody, because it accomplishes so much. So, like I said, difficult to talk about because I don't know where to begin. I absolutely loved it. I'll tell you right now, I'll give it an 11 out of 10. Much better than the first one, but it's not exactly what I wanted originally, because the reason I like the first book, well, a serial killer comes to a sleepy little town in America in the East, and basically that's really good at writing this sense of like, you have no real control of anything because you're up against a force of power and evil that's very real and well written, and so it feels like someone smashed together, a police thriller novel with a Stephen King novel, like with some supernatural horror element. But that supernatural horror element isn't explained initially or even insinuated that there's any connection to the immediate realistic threat. I never saw that done in a horror novel before, and so I was totally immersed in much more than the average, and I wanted more of that. This book's different. After the ending fight in the first book, the characters do what people would naturally do, making them all the more realistic. They're more immersive, more impressive, some more adrenaline, more payoff when scary moments happen after the slow burn effect takes place, and that is they try to take their minds off of the possibility that there's a connection between the threats that they've been going through and the supernatural, because that would make, for example, their bullets have no real defense against a background theme of the book as well: omnipresent, uncontrollable fate, things that are worse than death. So there is this background layer of existential fear. The author can write every type of fear as well. There's some of those moments of adrenaline, but more so, there's this subtly growing sense of menace as there's like diabolic conspiracies taking place in the background of the town of Pine Deep, as evil forces of intelligence are starting to spread, and sort of almost in a negative reinforcement cycle, in where evil sees evil, good sees good, and good characters are forced to eventually find some commonality, some friendship along the way, in having that common trauma and enemies and such. And so there's a tad bit of epic storytelling in the background as well. Like I said, it's hard to talk about because this book is so ambitious and pulls off every type of horror and horror storytelling that you're familiar with in an original way that ultimately just is so entertaining. It's so masterful for this huge amount of detail, the sense of place, the characters' asides, backstories, conversations, that slow burn quality that ultimately culminates in better payoff when adrenaline-based moments happen. I mean, you would think that it would be a slog to get through. Only like Neanderthal brain, unintelligent, lack of patience people would not really keep up with it. But there are some people who like more corny, watered down, pure pulp-based horror. I mean, on a certain days of the week, I guess I'm one of them myself. But this is a worthier investment, story-based horror, and because it's story-based, and takes its time. It gives ample room to explore many different areas. It's like a phantasmagorical montage of all the classics, and the author, bizarrely enough, is capable of taking like the classic Halloween monsters and making them like updated with a modern sense of pace, amazing writing ability that transports you there and make it feel like, an R-rated story that's for adults. It's mature, and one of the ways it's mature is that a lot of those monsters are not like existential. They're not supernatural. They're not criminal. They're real, but in the sense of there being like monsters of childhood trauma, connected to the background theme of childhood trauma, dealing with present ongoing evil, which the reciprocal theme would be the idea that evil, some evil is so powerful you can't really kill it. It just grows stronger, growing in dark places, so to say, where the light can't touch it. Come to back another time, which is very mysterious, like the nature of death itself, which truly does make you feel helpless, especially the more like emotionally sympathetic that these characters get as you get to know them, and the more vulnerable and oblivious they are to the threat as time goes on. So we have other types of monsters on the symbolic meta way, which you could actually, start to philosophize about. It's like it's not what you expected or asked for, but it's so much better in the long run. It's so much better than the first book in a way I didn't ask for, but I'm grateful that it challenged me in that regard. Realistic stuff like nobody feels safe. The negative effects of sexual assault, mental trauma, childhood trauma, feelings of guilt, the curse of Pine Deep for, aspects of its racist past. There's things like that. I guess you could call that a cultural monster. And I know what you're thinking, like, oh, okay, so vampires, werewolves, okay, I don't really want to read about that. I'd rather have a scary novel that's got something a little less corny and cheesy. Like believe me, I'm a corny, cheesy guy. If I had a corn and cheese taco with a corn tortilla, I would wolf it down in 0.01 microseconds. But even still, what I'm trying to say is that somehow it doesn't feel like, because of the execution, the realization, and the unfathomable way in which evil, makes these monsters a reality, they never feel like tropes, they never feel like archetypes, they are really only in name. And so what Maberry does is he takes an original modern feel to these classic things, similar to what Stephen King did for vampire lore with Salem's Lot. But I would say this pulls it off in a way you don't expect. It's not really about magic, it's not really about anything corny, the supernatural. It's about the relationship between the realities of evil, which feels very realistic, like other real world evils, which those monsters relate to, like trying to break people down psychologically, like personally, like demonic sort of stuff. And that resembles in the feel of when characters encounter negative situations and evil. It feels like realistic evil in real life, and so it's impossible for anyone to read this book and not feel a strong sense of nostalgia. I could talk about, like, I'm trying not to talk too much because I loved this book so much. For story reasons, it has such a wide breadth of so many different types of fear, that like he writes moments of just sheer gross out situations really well, subtlety, like the fact when characters are totally oblivious to what's going on and trying to use denial and focus on their human relationships and cling to what's real rather than prepare themselves psychologically by investigating the supernatural with an open mind, which would be the only knowledge would be the only real defense they have against what's haunted their town for such a long time. That only leaves the audience knowing the increasing mounting threat against them, while they seem to get further and further away from the truth, just clinging to the real world, which is very like non-scientific and narrow-minded in my opinion. And so that makes this really subtle layer of just feeling unsafe, and then it makes it more immersive. So when there's positivity and emotional payoff, it's so much more than if it hadn't been there. It's just a perfect example of why I love the horror genre, and this feels like a modern update of the horror genre. Just terribly underrated, a lot of fun, just really pure fun. And don't think it's not like, I hope I'm not trying to make it sound like it's some super intellectual thing. The soul of this book and the execution, it's easy to read, it's easy to get into. I might just try people's patience with the amount of details and world building and stuff. But there's almost no flaws of this book. It's a great story, good character arcs, The characters are some of the most realist and likable that I've ever read. Almost too likable. One of the few complaints I have, not really a complaint, but I wish Maberry's written a lot of books. This is only the second book I've read. I really want to read more books where he writes more like Quentin Tarantino type morally neutral characters. Instead, all our perspective characters are like heroic or they're villains, and there's no like moral in between. And so I think he, as a crime writer, he would. I'm sure he's written, like what he does is I think he's known for blending genres. I would like to read a straight crime pulp thriller by Maberry, or just a thriller. I don't know. I get lost in my definitions sometimes. Oh, one of the patterns of evil that he's good at writing really well is the idea of negative reinforcement cycles sort of gradually coalescing from seemingly otherwise unrelated areas, and as you realize how they're unrelated, but as you realize how they're connected and not unrelated, but not understanding the particulars of how, you have this existential like fear of like, wow, there's nothing I can do to stop whatever will is behind this negative reinforcement cycle. One of the sub themes of that larger theme would be, I'd say, was rot and decay and places where there's no actual intelligence intervening and witnessing what's going on. So evil, similarly in the real world, also lurks in the shadows, so to say. So talk about coolness for a second. The main character, Crow, is like, to me, one of my favorite characters of all time in any fiction ever, not just in the horror genre. I'd say surprisingly grows on you, extremely likable. It's like the archetype of the classic kid in a horror or slasher film that is cute, or a fantasy film like from the 80s that is cued into the bigger picture but kind of stayed somewhat childlike because of the traumatic things that happened to him. But at the same time, he never lost his ability, like The Shining or whatever. That's one adaptation of it. To see, to at least keep an open mind about what's going on, and so it's like the classic trope of the kid that nobody believes, but actually can see the horror that's going to come upon everyone else, as if they grew up and became an honorable man. And so, very good, well-written, inspiring hero that gets more and more likable, and it's just really hilarious as well. Other super cool characters, the Bone Man, don't want to give anything away, but damn, talk about like the essence of cool, and Maberry's is a cool writer in the way he brings that to life. Holy shit. Not so much cool, but cool in the way it's realized. The Freaks relates so much in a nostalgic way to so many places I've lived in America, and like my own hometown, which feels really similar. Ashland and Medford, Oregon, where I'm originally from, feels so similar to Pine Deep. It also has a sort of like Twin Peaks like vibe to it. Just you can sense some of the homages are like so much inspiration, similar to like a Tarantino film, in that it's not really stealing, it's being so much in love with certain keystone genre masterpieces. It's like lovingly homaging things. Some of them are direct pop culture references as well. So for horror fans, this is essential reading, I would say. Absolutely, no exaggeration. So also, inspiring emotional moments and some really profound, memorable moments that, like I said in my last video of the first book, so well written that it's burned into your mind in a good way. These characters, they grow on you in the second book. The first book, if you don't enjoy it, it's worth reading through and sitting through. I don't imagine how anyone couldn't. But this book is so much better, it's worth getting to this book just for story and character alone. So loads of heart, relationships fleshed out, understood. Not everything is just like great. There's realistic flaws. People have realistic flaws. If there's only one real complaint I have about this book, it would be that the heroic characters are a little too brave, and it's a little bit too unintentionally inspiring. They don't feel quite vulnerable enough. They do in a physical way, like with injuries and the threat of death or death itself, but not in a spiritual way. I am more transported into books that analyze fear to some level or other when the characters are afraid, maybe because they're selfish, they have more at stake to lose for their little world, the things they want to accomplish. They're not like altruistic. They're not willing to sacrifice their life for their friends. And I mean, it doesn't really get old to me. It's still inspiring, but it isn't exactly what I wanted. It's not really a complaint. So yeah, heroic characters are a little bit too badass and a little too brave. Now, that's cool, but it's not really what I wanted. There are a few cowardly characters, but they're not really perspective characters. So basically, the larger, I don't know if I could really easily explain one theme, because this book's characters and story are diverse. There's a lot that it's trying to accomplish. In the end, it is still pulpy enough. It's about suspense. It's about it's very cinematic in your mind. It's very visceral. It's not terribly deep. Most of the depth is what's implied. There isn't any like extremely profound like monologues or symbols that where there's going to be this giant catharsis at the end where it's like the ultimate perfect horror story. There is a sort of like town fair, like carny quality, like I don't know, like Something Wicked This Way comes combined with like The Walking Dead or something like that. So it has charm, but it's like adapted in a way it's edgier, more R-rated, more dark, and therefore for me personally more immersive. I got so lucky. I actually listened to a guy who calls himself Bridger on the Library Ladder, his booktuber review video YouTube channel, that recommended in a video talking about this trilogy. And man, I owe him a debt of gratitude for showing me Jonathan Maberry. I'm probably going to end up reading all of Jonathan Maberry's books. I loved this book. It was a little bit of everything I love smashed together. It's just like, talk about kindred spirits, you know what I mean? Holy shit. So at this point, I really care about the characters. I needed to see what happens next. I didn't hesitate to buy a copy of the third book. It's coming in the mail. I'm not really that worried what's going to happen to the characters, though, because Ken Foree is going to be in it. And he's got a lot of experience kicking the ass of armies of the undead. Also, pro tip, I recommend imagining the journalist character Newton as David Lynch. It makes for a younger version of David Lynch. It makes for a much more entertaining read, and it just kind of fits. So yeah, this book is a 100% recommend. 11 out of 10. Absolutely loved it. Can't wait to read the third one. It's got a little bit of everything, pretty much every type of horror there is. I don't know what else to say. I know I'm gonna remember shit later and just get frustrated, like being like, why didn't I put that in the video? That was one of my favorite. Well, whatever. I don't have time to edit these videos and like these are not analysis videos. These are spoiler-free review videos in a condensed form. And I know what you're thinking. You talk too much. How can it be a condensed form? I don't know. It's the best I can do because I'm so narcissistically opinionated. I don't feel like sane unless I talk a little bit about all the areas that spoke the most to me, and I believe I've done the best I can on that. So anyway, highly recommend Dead Man's Song by Jonathan Maberry. Modern horror masterpiece that homages a huge combination of many things from the past. And the story is immersive, it's emotional, characters are sympathetic, it's scary, it just works, and it's fun. It's just fun. So yeah, read it. Peace.